Live on international television in front of more than 63 million viewers around the world, a 36-year-old black president exposed the hidden ties between the United States and African terrorist groups, using just 3 photographs in a single email labeled MT. What happened next nearly cost a former First Lady her entire reputation and almost buried the political career of a rising young leader. Now the question is this: who's really pulling the strings behind the truth? And why does a single apology carry more power than an entire war? Ouagadougou, the capital of one of the most forgotten countries on earth, woke up that morning like it always did. There was no warning that history was about to take a dramatic turn. The sun rose quietly in the east, casting soft golden light over the deep red clay rooftops and dust-covered streets. The rhythmic footsteps of women carrying water jugs, the squabbling of children chasing a tattered rubber ball, and the soft jingles from roaming coffee carts all played like the background score to a life that had repeated itself for thousands of days. Beneath that calm surface, however, lay a bitter truth. In this country, everything seemed slower, poorer, and always came last. But deep behind the stone walls of the presidential palace, something had begun to shift. President Ibrahim Traoré entered his office at exactly 6:32 a.m. At just 36, he was one of the youngest heads of state in the world, never studied politics at Harvard, never raised a glass with ambassadors at cocktail parties. Instead, he had walked through the fires of youth in the Sahel, feet caked in mud, a Kalashnikov slung over his shoulder, and unhealed wounds from battles against terrorist groups. On his desk sat a cup of black coffee, a smooth leather notebook, and a small radio playing the morning news in French. The usual headlines: inflation, conflict in Sudan, another African Union summit. Nothing unusual until Colonel Sawadogo, his senior security advisor, stepped in. He didn't knock, as he usually did. His eyes were tense, and in his hands was a black leather briefcase sealed with a numerical lock and a special insignia, a lightning bolt cutting through the map of Burkina Faso. This seal was used only for top secret. No copies, no distribution documents. Without a word, the colonel placed the case on the desk. "Mr. President," he began, voice low, each syllable striking the marble floor like a hammer. "We've just wrapped up a signal jamming operation targeting an armed group in Mali. During decryption, our analysts found a strange stream of data emanating from the Kudugu gold mine. What we uncovered could shift the entire balance of diplomacy in Africa." Ibrahim didn't respond. He calmly set down his coffee and touched the lock. A soft click, but it made the room freeze. He opened the case. Inside was a thick stack of specially printed documents numbered up to page 347, a silver USB stick, and a gray folder labeled Confidential U.S. Commercial Interest Mapping, West Africa Sector. He picked a page near the front. His eyes stopped at a quote: "Projected extraction rate, 78 tons per quarter. Assets protected by third-party groups as per liaison agreement." He flipped through more pages, flowcharts mapping cash routes between 3 shell companies based in Houston and arms drop zones deep inside Burkina Faso. Page 32 had a satellite image of a gold mine located in a restricted zone marked Humanitarian Area by the United Nations. In the photo were cargo trucks filled with unmarked wooden crates, escorted by heavily armed men dressed as civilians. At the bottom corner of one page, Ibrahim read 3 lines. "Payments continue as agreed. Extraction exceeded projections. MT confirms with discreet approval." His eyebrows furrowed. "Who's MT?" he asked, almost to himself. "We're investigating that," Colonel Sawadogo replied. "Could be an abbreviation for a high-ranking official. Some believe it might refer to Melania Trump, but we haven't confirmed it. The document lacks a digital signature." Ibrahim said nothing, but his eyes changed, from surprise to suspicion, and finally to something that had no name. It was the look of a man who had lost friends as sniper bullets in the north, now realizing those bullets may have been paid for by companies working hand in hand with the West. Hours later, in a secret war room beneath the eastern wing of the palace, an emergency meeting was called. 8 people appeared in silence, the core of the government. No press, no assistance, only hurried glances and shallow breaths. Ibrahim didn't need to speak much. He projected 3 images onto the screen: the charred bodies of children near the mine, a fax transfer from a U.S. firm to a rebel group, and finally the printed line with the initials MT. The room went silent, not because they didn't understand, but because they understood too well. They knew that if these were made public, it wouldn't just be America that turned on them. The world would abandon a small, poor country with no leverage, no clout, and no voice. "We should keep this classified," said the foreign minister first. "If we act rashly, the economy will collapse. We're still awaiting IMF summer aid." The finance minister followed. "If trade agreements are revoked, we won't be able to pay teachers or doctors. We must tread carefully." But none of them denied the documents were real. None dared swear their country hadn't been exploited. None could pretend that behind every so-called humanitarian project wasn't a cargo ship loaded with gold, leaving behind nothing but graves. Ibrahim stood quietly by the tall window, watching the sky change colors. A soft wind stirred. In the courtyard below, a group of schoolchildren walked by, barefoot, in torn clothes, yet laughing joyfully. He didn't speak for several minutes. Then he turned back, his voice low, steady, measured like every word was weighed in blood. "You're right," he said. "If I stay silent, we keep our relationships. If I stay silent, I'll be invited to Davos." He paused, eyes scanning each face. "But let me ask you, how many times have we chosen silence?" No one answered. And in that moment, without a vote, without applause, without even a press release, a decision was made. A storm had begun, and it would all start with a black briefcase. The rain from the night before had left Ouagadougou's sky heavy and suffocating, as if even the earth itself was holding its breath, waiting for something unspeakable to unfold. By early morning, a growing crowd of reporters had gathered outside the presidential palace. Their vans and camera trucks lined up along the main boulevard, their antennas stretching higher than the national flagpole. CNN, BBC Al Jazeera, France 24, giants of global media, had set up makeshift camps, laying cables and positioning microphones with the care of surgeons preparing for a moment that could shift the course of history. All of them had arrived on short notice, having received an invitation just 7 hours earlier from a country most Americans couldn't even place on a map. And yet, they crossed continents for a single sentence. One line from the Burkina Faso presidential office that simply read, "President Traoré will disclose classified documents with the potential to alter global order." At exactly 1:59 p.m. local time, the double ebony doors of the palace opened. Ibrahim Traoré stepped forward, tall, composed, carrying the same black briefcase the world had come to recognize. There were no bodyguards, no ceremonial backdrops, no national anthem. Just one man facing the world's cameras, his expression unreadable, his eyes burning with something ancient and unshakable. He placed the briefcase on the podium, opened it, and pulled the microphone close. "Thank you for being here," he said. "I won't give a speech. I will only speak the truth, a truth buried beneath blood, metal, and the silence of the international community." The screen behind him lit up. The first image showed a barren, cratered landscape, an unregulated gold mine. In the corner were two scorched bodies, partially buried under rubble. "This is Gorsi Gold Mine, coordinates 12.5 Degan, 1.1 Andegu, officially labeled a humanitarian zone, but in reality, a slaughterhouse. Over 800 civilians, including children, forced into labor, killed to keep a golden river flowing endlessly westward." He advanced to the second image, a satellite photo capturing freight convoys leaving Burkina Faso under the cover of darkness. Each truck carried at least 3 tons of unregistered, untaxed gold. Then came the third slide, and the air in the room turned thick. A photo of soldiers dressed in U.S. camouflage shaking hands with rebel commanders along the Mali border. They weren't sent here to protect us from terrorists. They were sent to protect mining assets. Because of this, $2.3 billion has vanished from my country in just 3 years. Half that amount could have built 50 hospitals, 200 schools, and delivered clean water to over 2 million people. No one moved, no one typed. Even the background whispers of news editors faded into nothing. Ibrahim then produced a printed email dated March 15, 2024. It was sent from Robert Hayes, CEO of Goldmine Corp., to an unnamed recipient. The content read, "Payments continue as agreed. Extraction exceeds expectations. MT confirms." The digital signature was faint, but the initials MT were circled in red ink. Half a world away, in the White House's third-floor office, Melania Trump was reviewing her calendar when her assistant burst in without knocking. "You need to see this, now." She turned toward the screen. There was Ibrahim, mid-broadcast. Next to him, the now viral email. The initials MT glowed red like a bloodstain on white paper. She blinked. Once. Twice. It was still there. Her face turned pale. Her lips trembled, but no words came out. In that surreal moment, the United States, the world's mightiest power, found itself being judged under a global lens by a nation where most citizens still lack 24-hour electricity. On social media, hashtags ignited like wildfire. Burkina leaks, Melania Gate, Traoré truth. News networks cut regular programming to air the press conference live. The CIA held an emergency meeting. The State Department was left speechless. And somewhere in Mar-a-Lago, when Donald Trump received a message linking MT to his wife, he slammed his hand on the table and roared, "That boy is trying to take us down." But beneath the fury, there was something far more chilling. The look in Ibrahim's eyes as he spoke the next words. "We are not releasing this out of vengeance. We do not want war. We want only one thing, that the world finally admit that silence in the face of evil is itself a form of evil." The room froze. Even seasoned journalists who had seen blood and bombs felt something tighten around their chests. Melania stood quietly at the window. There were no photos, no cameras, just a woman suddenly at the center of the storm. She whispered something only she could hear. "I never did. But why me?" In that instant, the legacy she had built, a legacy of elegance, restraint, and diplomacy, began to unravel. Not because of what she had done, but because in the world of media, truth is secondary to the story people are ready to believe. And this chapter didn't end with an explosion. It ended with a silent, invisible quake, the kind that doesn't shake buildings, but breaks certainty. Because sometimes the most painful part of betrayal isn't the betrayal itself. It's not knowing who the real betrayer is. And this was only the beginning. From the moment the initials MT were projected on the screen during a globally televised press conference, the name Melania Trump was no longer associated with grace in American politics. Within just 6 hours of President Ibrahim Traoré's speech, her image was splashed across headlines from Europe to Africa, from CNN to scandal-driven tabloids. But the real blow didn't come from official news coverage. It came from behind the screens, in the form of venomous tweets and ruthless comments typed without pause, logic, or the need for proof. The hashtag #MelaniaGate began spreading with unprecedented speed, reaching over 10 million mentions in just 14 hours. A short video clip showing Ibrahim holding up the email with the circled initials MT was isolated and retitled, "First Lady Exposed." That video reached 82 million views in under 3 days, even though Melania appeared in it for exactly 1 second. As the story exploded, Melania was at her private residence in Mar-a-Lago, preparing for a charity fundraiser for children with cancer. The dress had been pressed, the speech rehearsed, and the foundation had committed $750,000 in aid. But within 24 hours of Ibrahim's address, 7 out of the 9 top sponsors pulled out. Some accused her of performative humanitarianism. Others demanded their donations be returned. The event was canceled overnight. No explanation, no official statement. The next day, an international charity formally requested that she be suspended from her honorary ambassador role. Just a week earlier, Melania had delivered remarks at the Global Women's Summit. Now she wasn't invited anywhere. Not because she was guilty, but because no one wanted to be seen standing next to someone under suspicion. Her personal legal team was mobilized immediately. Digital forensic experts were brought in to dissect every line of the email Ibrahim had displayed. The preliminary report pointed to at least 3 anomalies. The sender's address did not match official White House communications channels. The digital signature failed verification against archives registered with the National Records Office, and timestamp data showed the email was allegedly sent while Melania was publicly speaking at an event in Boston. Lead attorney David Morrison concluded in his report, this email is highly likely to be fabricated. However, the forgery is exceptionally advanced, employing encryption patterns similar to high-level government communications. This was not the work of an amateur hacker. But none of that stopped the judgment from spreading, because in the age of social media, truth isn't decided by courts. It's decided by how fast a story travels and how much people want to believe it. Photoshopped images began circulating. Melania in a white dress standing next to a map of Burkina Faso. Melania shaking hands with an African man edited to resemble a military commander. Melania superimposed into scenes of burning gold mines taken from documentaries. No one verified them. No one cared. Because by then, truth was no longer as important as the satisfaction of watching an icon fall. 3 days after Ibrahim's speech, Melania stepped out of her house for the first time. Photographers were already waiting. Flashbulbs exploded like machine guns. Wearing a modest beige dress, she walked between two security agents without lowering her head, but her lips were tightly pressed, her hands clenched around her coat pockets. One reporter shouted, "Have you ever been to Burkina Faso?" Another cut in, "Did you know MT in the email was referring to you?" Melania paused mid-step, turned toward the crowd. She said nothing. Her gaze held no anger, no panic, just the quiet bewilderment of a person trying to understand how a reputation built over a lifetime could be shattered by 3 letters. That night, she sat alone in her room. No lights, no television, no aides. No one in her family had brought it up all day, as if silence might dissolve the storm. But in that silence, Melania stood before her mirror, wiping off the remnants of her makeup, not as the wife of a former president, not as the First Lady of the United States, but simply as a woman trying to keep her name from becoming a viral disgrace. She didn't say a word. She didn't beg. She didn't explain. Only tears, slow, quiet tears, not the kind born of pain, but the kind that fall when you realize there's no one left to convince that you are innocent. That feeling, the knowledge that you've done nothing wrong yet no one believes you anymore, is perhaps the most devastating collapse a human being can endure. 3 days had passed since the world first heard the name Melania Gate. 3 days without an official response from the government of Burkina Faso, no confirmation, no denial. American media was in a frenzy, while in Europe, political leaders began treading carefully whenever President Ibrahim Traoré's name came up. Was he a bold hero exposing exploitation, or a cunning showman diverting attention from internal failures? Meanwhile, in complete silence, 2 investigations unfolded in parallel. One led by the FBI in Washington, the other by Burkina Faso's Special Intelligence Agency. There were no press briefings, no public statements, no visible moves. But behind closed doors, dozens of analysts and agents worked around the clock. The FBI traced anomalies in internal server activity and discovered something troubling. A relay server based in the Czech Republic had accessed a secure White House communication network just 9 days before Traoré's press conference. The encryption used wasn't American, but military-grade nonetheless. Simultaneously, Burkina Faso's intelligence uncovered that the USB drive containing the incriminating MT email had been previously inserted into a device located at the Russian embassy in Abidjan, Ivory Coast. Linking the 2 findings, their internal report concluded, the document implicating Melania Trump had been planted deliberately, surgically. Not a mishap, not a misunderstanding. This was sabotage, engineered by a foreign intelligence operation believed to be associated with the Wagner Group, a shadow network rumored to operate under Moscow's influence. When that report was laid on President Ibrahim Traoré's desk, not a single person in the room had dared to breathe. It was the same silence that had settled during the first fateful briefing, but heavier now, weighted by the burden of choice. Would he defend the truth or protect his pride? Traoré read the report from start to finish without interrupting. Not a word, not a question. 47 minutes in a windowless room. And finally he spoke. Prepare a press conference. This time, we speak the truth. Exactly 24 hours later, at the same hour Melania Gate had first broken, the ebony doors of the presidential palace opened once more. Same podium, same cameras, same reporters. But the atmosphere had changed. Quieter, steadier, more solemn. No one knew what would be said, but everyone sensed this would not be an attack. Ibrahim walked out. White shirt, no tie, unshaven jaw, dark circles beneath sleepless eyes. He bowed slightly, said nothing, then looked directly into the camera. Exactly 24 hours later, at the same hour Melania Gate had first broken, the ebony doors of the presidential palace opened once more. Same podium, same cameras, same reporters. But the atmosphere had changed, quieter, steadier, more solemn. No one knew what would be said, but everyone sensed this would not be an attack. Ibrahim walked out. White shirt, no tie, unshaven jaw, dark circles beneath sleepless eyes. He bowed slightly, said nothing, then looked directly into the camera. I am the highest authority responsible for every word, every declaration issued by the office of the President of Burkina Faso. Last week, I released a series of documents, one of which implicated First Lady Melania Trump. Today, after thorough investigations from both the United States and our own intelligence agency, I must confirm those particular documents were falsified. And that woman, Mrs. Melania, is entirely innocent. His words were slow, each syllable like water cutting through stone. No one typed, no one spoke. The global press, trained to remain unfazed, was struck silent. We have discovered that a foreign spy network, identified to have ties with the Wagner organization, infiltrated internal communication channels and inserted a counterfeit email signed MT. It was a blow against American dignity and a trap for us. We walked into that trap, and for that, I take full responsibility. He paused. He didn't look away. He didn't lower his head. Instead, he stared into the lens. I apologize to Mrs. Melania Trump for being dragged into a crisis she never asked for. I apologize to the American people for allowing unverified information to cause pain and confusion. And I apologize to the people of Burkina Faso for, in one critical moment, failing to uphold the standard of truth our leadership must demand. Then he ended with a whisper of a sentence. Sometimes, in order to protect the truth, we must first admit we were wrong. On the other side of the globe, inside the White House, Melania sat quietly before the screen. The room was bright, but no one dared step in. Her assistant stood behind her, barely breathing. Melania didn't smile. She didn't cry. But her eyes turned red, softly, slowly, like someone who'd just felt invisible shackles fall away. A name that had been poisoned for days was at last being unbound. And this time, social media responded with a different tone. Not with outrage or ridicule, but with something more human. Ibrahim is braver than any world leader I've ever seen. Apologizing is the mark of true strength. This is why we need leaders with a heart. No one applauded during that press conference. There were no cheers, no frantic questions, just a stillness that settled across the room. Not of fear, but of respect. A young black president from one of the world's poorest countries had stood before the world, admitted a mistake, and asked for forgiveness, something that many lifelong politicians had never dared to do. And in that moment, something paradoxical happened. Instead of losing credibility, Ibrahim Traoré gained something far more powerful. From the ashes of suspicion, he earned the world's trust. 3 days after the global shockwave of a press conference where a young African leader stood before the world and asked for forgiveness, the world was still buzzing with talk of political courage and moral integrity. But just as the headlines began to settle, a new announcement left the international community speechless. Melania Trump, the very woman once caught in the eye of the scandal, declared that she would personally travel to Burkina Faso. Her decision came not through a flashy statement or a media campaign, but in one quiet sentence from her private office at the White House. I need to see it with my own eyes. I can't let what I went through remain a personal wound. I want to understand the pain of an entire nation. The press went into overdrive. Security advisors convened emergency meetings. Political analysts on TV shook their heads. It's a risky move, said one Fox News commentator. She's stepping into a land that once accused her, then apologized, but hasn't necessarily forgiven. But Melania didn't wait for approval. In a private session with her closest advisors, she said just one thing. If that man had the courage to bow his head before the world and apologize to me, then I must find the courage to stand before his country and listen with my heart. On the day she left Washington, there was no fluttering of American flags, no triple-tier motorcade. The aircraft used was Air Force Two, typically reserved for the vice president, because this was not a formal diplomatic visit. But no one cared about protocol anymore. Her presence in Burkina Faso was a declaration in itself, a historical moment. That morning, Ouagadougou rose earlier than usual. No one issued orders, no campaigns were launched, but from distant villages to the capital, thousands of citizens made paper flags and wooden signs by hand. Bienvenue, Madame Melania was scribbled in clumsy French on scraps of cardboard, but the affection behind each word was unmistakable. The national broadcaster began airing live footage at 4 a.m. This time, the reporters weren't suspicious. They were curious, waiting to witness a moment never before seen. A First Lady of the United States setting foot on the soil of a country that once branded her a criminal. At 11:06 a.m., a white-painted aircraft touched down on the tarmac of Thomas Sankara International Airport. The sky was bright, as if no storm had ever passed. When the aircraft door opened, Melania Trump stepped out in simple clothing. A white blouse, beige khaki pants, no jewelry, no photo ops, no speeches, no presidential waves, just slow steps and a steady gaze forward to where President Ibrahim Traoré was waiting. He wore no uniform. There was no flag ceremony, no national anthem. Just a young man placing his hand over his heart, bowing and saying, "Welcome to Burkina Faso." The handshake that followed between two people once on opposite ends of suspicion was silent, free of pomp, yet captured by cameras around the world. It became a symbol of something rare in modern times, the courage to meet in the space between truth and error. The visit lasted 3 days. There were no banquets, no speeches filled with promises, no press releases announcing aid packages. Instead, the trip took Melania to places that made viewers' hearts ache. On the first day, she visited a small refugee camp in Kaya, where hundreds of women and children had lost their homes to terrorist attacks. She sat silently as a mother recounted how she had to choose between saving her 3-year-old child or carrying her newborn during a fire set by militants. No translation was needed. The woman spoke in Moor, but Melania didn't need to understand the words. She just listened. When the story ended, she took the woman's hand and held it tightly, eyes red. The entire camp fell into a hush. Then a young girl walked up and placed a drawing in her hand, a picture of a woman holding a heart, standing between two flags, one American, one Burkinabe. On the second day, she visited a rural district hospital. In a dim, overcrowded room where 4 children shared a single oxygen tank, Melania picked up a boy around 2 years old, skin and bones, hollow eyes. She held him for 10 straight minutes, unmoving. Ibrahim stood beside her, silent. As they exited, she turned to him and said in a whisper, "They don't deserve to be forgotten, just because the powerful no longer look where they walk." That sentence was never aired on television, but everyone who was there remembered it, and it was repeated hundreds of times across social media, shared by doctors, nurses, and witnesses. A single sentence spoken softly but powerful enough to stir the world's conscience. On the final day, in a humble ceremony at a rural school built from reclaimed gold mining funds, Ibrahim and Melania signed a memorandum to establish the Melania Burkina Fund, dedicated to advancing girls' education across West Africa. No one asked her to do it. There was no delegation, no diplomatic pressure. In her closing remarks, her voice broke in places. "If I was once brought down by something untrue, then today I want to use that same moment to build something real. I will stand with you, not because I was insulted, but because I have been heard, and I have been forgiven." Then she turned to Ibrahim, who didn't smile, didn't clap, only gave a solemn nod, eyes deep like the history of the continent itself. Amid dust, wind, and sun, the two individuals once pulled into conflict by a lie stood side by side, not for politics, but for humanity. And once again, the world fell silent, this time moved not by scandal, but by the resonance of the human spirit. 3 days after Melania Trump's historic visit, Burkina Faso, once a footnote in humanitarian reports and poverty charts, emerged unexpectedly as a new moral center of the world. Not because it had become richer, not because it had become stronger, but because it had dared to apologize and dared to forgive. When Melania returned to the United States, there was no grand press conference, no radiant, camera-ready appearance. Instead, she spent a week in quiet preparation for something no one anticipated, the founding of the Melania Burkina Foundation. This wasn't a PR move, it was a promise. And that promise came entirely from her own resources. No government channels, no corporate sponsors. The press release was only 82 words long, but it shook the globe. The mission: to fund scholarships for 1,000 African girls each year, to build 10 new schools in areas affected by illegal gold mining, and to begin construction of 3 maternal hospitals within 18 months. Yet what moved people most was not the scale, but the principle behind the foundation. Where the wounded once stood, let them now be the ones who heal. No more political talk shows. No more debates over who was right. Just action. The international media, once responsible for thrusting Melania into the storm, began to change its tone. Major outlets ran new headlines, from the accused to the architect of reconciliation. Burkina Faso, where a lie gave birth to compassion. Pundits who once attacked her now issued public apologies. But Melania never responded with bitterness. She didn't label anyone a traitor. She demanded no retractions. Instead, she appeared at an international education summit in Geneva, standing before thousands and saying one quiet sentence: honor is not about never making mistakes. Honor is the courage to correct them, and the grace not to turn others into victims just because you were once hurt. No standing ovation, no chants, just silence. The kind that comes from deep respect. And that kind of honor needs no media validation. It only needs to be remembered by the hearts of those who witnessed it. 6 months after the media earthquake, life in Burkina Faso seemed to return to its usual rhythm. The red dust roads were swept each morning. Children in light purple uniforms walked to school in recycled rubber sandals. But something had changed. The eyes of the people, no longer lowered, no longer resigned. They had seen their country's name mentioned, not for famine, but for dignity. One quiet evening, as President Ibrahim Traoré sat writing in his journal, his wife Ajara gently placed a hand on his shoulder and asked, "Do you ever regret it?" He paused, looked up, and smiled. If it weren't for that fall, the world would never have noticed us. Sometimes it's our mistakes that open the door to dreams we never dared to have. At that very moment in Washington, Melania stood before the U.S. Congress, not to speak about herself, but about freedom of information and human dignity. Her address lasted 14 minutes, not a single word wasted. She called for legislation to combat disinformation, protect personal dignity in the age of viral media, and promote education and digital truth within American schools. The speech stirred no controversy, needed no fiery rhetoric, yet The Atlantic called it the first ethical milestone of the 21st century. And then, in the final passage of a memoir published 1 year later, Ibrahim wrote, "I once believed peace came through treaties, through paper, through summits, but I was wrong. Peace does not come from hiding. It comes from facing what is real, from having the courage to be wrong, the humility to make it right, and the strength to keep walking, even when the soles of your feet are still bleeding." If this touched your heart, even just a little, we ask for only one thing: don't let it stop here. Subscribe to our channel for more real, soul-stirring stories that remind us of the power of compassion, dignity, and silent courage. And if you believe the world needs more leaders like Ibrahim Traoré, leave a comment below with just one word: hope. Let's flood the world with it. Disclaimer: this video is a transformative, creative retelling inspired by real humanitarian values and public leadership. It is intended for educational and emotional engagement under the principles of fair use. We do not claim official affiliation with any government figure or entity. All visual audio materials used are edited and repurposed for commentary, inspiration, and social reflection.